Yeah, and I gave him everything, but he gave his love to another woman. The morning James left, I was making his favorite breakfast blueberry pancakes with maple syrup just the way his mother used to make them. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and butter, and sunlight streamed through our apartment windows, painting golden squares on the hardwood floor. I hummed softly, thinking about the surprise I'd planned for his birthday next week. I had no idea that in 20 minutes, my entire world would shatter like a dropped wine glass. Sarah, we need to talk. Those four words. Every person in a relationship knows the weight they carry. I turned from the stove spatula still in hand and saw him standing in the doorway with a suitcase. His usually bright hazel eyes couldn't meet mine. What's going on? My voice came out smaller than I intended. The pancake on the griddle started to burn, but neither of us moved to flip it. I'm leaving, he said simply, as if he were announcing he was going to the grocery store. I've met someone else. The spatula clattered to the floor. 7 years, 7 years of my life, and he condensed our ending into 5 words. Shar, the beginning of us. To understand the magnitude of that moment, you need to know how we began. James and I met at a coffee shop, cliche, I know, but sometimes cliches happen for a reason. I was a graduate student drowning in thesis research about sustainable architecture. He was a struggling musician playing guitar at the corner table for tips and free coffee. How you've been staring at that same page for an hour, he'd said during his break, sliding into the seat across from me. Either it's the most fascinating thing ever written, or you're completely stuck. I looked up ready to politely dismiss whoever was interrupting my spiral of academic panic, but his smile stopped me. It wasn't just attractive though he was, with his tousled brown hair and those hazel eyes that seemed to hold secrets. It was genuine, warm, and somehow made me feel like everything would be okay. Completely stuck, I admitted. I'm trying to write about innovative building materials, but all I can think about is how I haven't eaten anything but coffee and anxiety for 2 days. He laughed a rich sound that made other cafe patrons look our way. Well, I can't help with innovative building materials, but I know where they make the best grilled cheese in the city. Want to grab one after I finish my set? That was James' spontaneous charming, able to make me forget my worries with a single suggestion. I said yes, and that grilled cheese turned into dinner the next week, which turned into breakfast the morning after, which turned into 7 years of building a life together, the Shah building our world. In the early days, love felt easy. We moved in together after 8 months, finding a small apartment in the arts district that we could barely afford. The walls were thin, the hot water temperamental, but it was ours. I'd study at the kitchen table while he practiced guitar in the living room, creating a soundtrack to my academic life. Not you're my muse, he'd say, kissing my temple as I hunched over my laptop. Every song I write is about you, and I believed him. Why wouldn't I? When he played at local venues, he'd dedicate songs to the beautiful woman who keeps me grounded. When he struggled with writer's block or another rejection from a record label, I was there with encouragement and homemade dinners. When his father got sick, I took time off from my internship to drive with him to Ohio, holding his hand through the funeral and the complicated grief that followed. I gave him everything. Not just the obvious things, money when gigs were scarce, a stable home, emotional support. I gave him my dreams too, reshaping them to fit our life together. When I got a job offer in Seattle, a dream position at a sustainable architecture firm, I turned it down because James had just started to gain traction in our local music scene. You're incredible, he'd said that night, wrapping me in his arms. I promise I'll make this worth it. When I make it big, we'll move wherever you want. Paris, Tokyo, Seattle, anywhere. I poured myself into his career. I became his unofficial manager, booking gigs, managing his social media, designing flyers, and networking with venue owners. I used my design skills to create his album covers, spent my weekends at his shows, and converted our spare bedroom into a home studio. My friends joked that I was more invested in his music career than he was. Maybe they weren't joking. They're the slow unraveling. Looking back, the signs were there. Love makes you blind, they say, but it's more accurate to say that love makes you an optimist. You see warning signs and transform them into quirks, red flags into misunderstandings that better communication could solve. It started with small things. He'd come home later from gigs claiming the networking was important. He'd guard his phone, angling it away when texts came in. He became critical of things that never bothered him. Before my tendency to plan everything, the way I organized our bookshelf, how I laughed too loudly at movies. You're suffocating me, he said during one fight about 6 months before the end. Everything is always about your timeline, your plans. What about spontaneity? What about living in the moment? The accusation stung because I'd built my entire life around his spontaneity. Every careful plan I made was to give him the freedom to pursue his dreams without worry. But I apologized, tried to be less structured, more go with the flow. I bought us tickets to a music festival, suggested impromptu road trips, tried to recapture the effortless joy of our early days. He seemed happier for a while. We had a good month where he was affectionate again, present in conversations, excited about us. He even started talking about marriage, about kids, about that house in the suburbs I'd shown him online, with the perfect room for a music studio. And I want to give you everything, what he'd said one night after we'd made love. You deserve the world, Sarah. 3 weeks later, he met her. Dara, the other woman. Her name was Luna, of course it was. She was everything I wasn't, a fellow musician with purple-streaked hair and vintage band t-shirts. Someone who understood the 3 a.m. creative bursts and the intoxicating high of a perfect performance. She was 23 to my 31, unburdened by mortgages and 5-year plans. They met at an open mic night I couldn't attend because of a work deadline. He came home buzzing with excitement about this incredible artist he'd jammed with, how she'd elevated his playing, how she understood his musical vision in a way that felt almost telepathic. Ma, you'd really like her, he said, and I believed that too. I was secure in our relationship, proud that he was networking, making connections. I even suggested he invite her to dinner so I could meet this kindred spirit. She came over on a Thursday. I made my famous lasagna, opened good wine, and tried to ignore the way they seemed to communicate without words, finishing each other's sentences about chord progressions and obscure bands I'd never heard of. She was actually lovely, warm, funny, genuinely complimentary about our apartment and my cooking. She asked thoughtful questions about my work and seemed impressed by my career. You're so lucky, she'd said to James when she thought I was in the kitchen. Sarah's amazing. The way she supports your music, not many people would do that. He'd mumbled something I couldn't hear, but when I came back with dessert, they were sitting further apart, the energy shifted. Luna left early, claiming an early morning shift at the record store where she worked. She seems nice, I said while washing dishes, my back to James. Yeah, he replied, but his voice was strange, distant. Yeah. That night, he stayed up late in the studio playing the same melancholy melody over and over. I fell asleep to the sound, not knowing he was already composing his goodbye. Then starts the crumbling foundation. The next 2 months were torture disguised as normalcy. James threw himself into his music with renewed passion, spending long hours writing and practicing. He was inspired, he said finally, breaking through creative barriers that had held him back. I was thrilled for him, even as I noticed he was writing songs, unlike anything he'd done before, darker, more complex, infused with a yearning I didn't recognize. He started going to more open mics, more late-night jam sessions. Luna was usually there. He mentioned casually, part of a growing collective of musicians pushing each other to excel. He'd come home at dawn, sliding into bed smelling like whiskey and cigarettes, though he'd quit smoking 3 years ago at my request. It's just the bar, he'd mumble when I mentioned it. Everyone smokes at these places. Our sex life, once passionate and frequent, dwindled to perfunctory encounters. He'd close his eyes and I wondered who he was seeing behind those lids. He stopped dedicating songs to me at shows. He stopped inviting me to shows at all. It's just weird having you there, he explained when I confronted him. I feel like I'm performing for you instead of the audience. I need to be in the zone, you know. I didn't know, but I pretended I did. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects, staying late at the office. If he could have his separate world, maybe I needed one too. My colleagues noticed my increased dedication, and there was talk of a promotion, a big project lead. I didn't tell James. He hadn't asked about my work in weeks. One night I came home early with Chinese takeout, his favorite, hoping to surprise him. The apartment was empty, but his guitar was gone. I checked his usual haunts via Instagram stories from other musicians. There he was on stage at a venue across town playing with Luna. They were magnetic together, their chemistry undeniable, even through pixelated phone footage. The way she looked at him while they sang, that was how I used to look at him. I sat on our couch takeout, growing cold on the coffee table, and watched strangers' social media posts of my boyfriend falling in love with someone else. The comments were enthusiastic. You two should form a band. The chemistry is unreal. Power couple in the making. When he came home after midnight, I was still on the couch surrounded by empty wine bottles and used tissues. We need to talk, I said. Not tonight, he replied, not even looking at me as he headed to the studio. I'm exhausted. James, my voice cracked. Please, He stopped, shoulders tense. For a moment, I thought he'd turn around, that we'd have the conversation that might save us. Instead, he said, "Tomorrow, okay, I promise." But tomorrow he was gone before I woke up. Rush serves the days before the end. The last week of our relationship, though I didn't know it then, was a masterclass in cognitive dissonance. James was physically present but emotionally absent, going through the motions of our life like an actor who'd forgotten his lines. He'd kiss me goodbye in the morning, quick pecks that landed near my mouth but not on it. He'd respond to my texts with single words or emojis. He'd eat the dinners I made while scrolling through his phone, occasionally showing me funny memes but never meeting my eyes. I became a detective in my own home, looking for clues I didn't want to find. A purple hair tie on his guitar case, a notebook filled with lyrics about being torn between comfort and passion, duty and desire, a credit card statement showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to, always for 2 meals. "Who's the other meal for?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Band stuff," he said without hesitation. "You know how it is buying dinner for venue owners, other musicians, networking." I wanted to ask why networking required intimate dinners at expensive restaurants we could never afford as a couple. I wanted to ask why his network seemed to consist primarily of one purple-haired guitarist. Instead, I said, "That's great, babe. I'm glad things are going so well." He looked at me, then really looked at me for the first time in weeks. Something flickered across his face, guilt, maybe, or pity. "Sarah, you know I love you, right?" "Of course," I said automatically. "No, I mean..." He reached for my hand, held it like something fragile. "You know you're important to me. Everything you've done for me, for us. I need you to know that I see it. All of it." It felt like a goodbye, but I pushed the thought away. "I know," I said. "I love you too." He squeezed my hand once and let go. 3 days later, he was packing that suitcase. Nash, the morning everything changed. Which brings us back to that morning, standing in our kitchen with smoke rising from the forgotten pancake, staring at the man I'd built my life around as he prepared to demolish it. "How long?" I asked. The words came out steady, which surprised us both. How long have you been with her?" He flinched. It's not physical." "That's not what I asked." He set the suitcase down, ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. 2 months. Maybe a little more. I didn't mean for it to happen. 2 months. 8 weeks of coming home to me, sleeping beside me, letting me plan our future while he was falling in love with someone else. "Do you love her?" The question burned my throat. "Sarah, do you love her?" He closed his eyes. "Yes." The word hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the counter to stay upright. "More than me. It's not about more or less. It's different. She gets parts of me that I don't," I finished. "The music parts, the creative parts, the important parts." "That's not fair." I laughed, but it came out wrong, sharp, and bitter. "You're leaving me for another woman, and you want to talk about fair? You don't understand," he said, and for the first time, anger crept into his voice. "With Luna, I don't have to be anything but myself. I don't have to live up to some perfect boyfriend ideal. Don't have to worry about 5-year plans and mortgage payments and whatever suburban dream you've constructed for us. She sees me as an artist, not a project to be managed." Each word was carefully chosen to wound, and they did their job. 7 years of love, support, and sacrifice reduced to management. "I gave up everything for your art," I said quietly. "My job offer in Seattle, my savings, my weekends, I never asked you to..." He was shouting now. "That's the thing, Sarah. You gave and gave and gave, but I never asked for it. You decided what I needed and provided it without ever asking what I wanted. You wanted to pursue music. I supported that. No, you controlled it, scheduled it, optimized it. You turned my passion into a business plan." We stood there, years of unspoken resentments spilling onto the kitchen floor alongside the burned smell of ruined breakfast. Part of me wanted to fight, to list every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd deferred. But a larger part was exhausted, hollowed out by the realization that while I'd been building a life, he'd been planning an escape. "So what now?" and I asked. "I'm staying with Tom for a while. I'll come back for the rest of my stuff later. The lease is paid through next month, so you have time to figure things out." How generous. 7 years, and he was giving me 30 days to reconstruct my life. "What about the bills, the car payment, we'll figure it out," he said, already backing toward the door. "I'll call you. James." He stopped but didn't turn. "Were any of the songs really about me?" His shoulders sagged. "All of them were, until they weren't. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in an apartment that suddenly felt too big, too quiet, too full of the ghost of us." Such as the aftermath. The first few days after James left were a blur of disbelief and practical concerns. I called in sick to work, unable to imagine sitting at my desk and pretending to care about sustainable building materials when my own foundation had crumbled. I moved through the apartment like an archaeologist discovering artifacts of our relationship. His favorite mug, the throw pillow he always hogged during movie nights, sticky notes with lyrics scattered throughout our space like breadcrumbs leading nowhere. My phone became an instrument of torture. Every notification made my heart race. Maybe it was him, maybe he'd realized his mistake. But it was never him. Instead, I received concerned texts from friends who'd seen Luna's Instagram post a black and white photo of two guitars leaning against each other captioned, "When you find your harmony." My best friend Mia came over on day 3 armed with wine and righteous anger. "I'm going to kill him," she announced, surveying the damage. Empty ice cream containers used tissues me in the same pajamas I'd worn since he left. Slowly, painfully, maybe with his own guitar strings. "He's not worth prison time," I mumbled from my cocoon of blankets. "You're right, he's not worth anything." She started cleaning, throwing away the detritus of my grief with efficient movements. "Have you eaten actual food? Ice cream is dairy, dairy's food." "Sarah," she sat beside me and her voice gentled, "you need to take care of yourself." Why, it was an honest question. I took care of him for 7 years. I took care of us. And look where it got me. "No," Mia said firmly. "You take care of yourself because you deserve it. Not for anyone else. For you." Dire, the unraveling truth. As days turned into weeks, anger began to seep through the cracks of my heartbreak. Not the hot explosive kind, this was colder, clearer. I started seeing our relationship without the soft, focused lens of love. I remembered all the times I'd made myself smaller to make room for his dreams. The conversations where my work achievements were glossed over so we could discuss his latest song. The friends I'd lost touch with because they didn't fit into the musician crowd he preferred. The hobbies I'd abandoned, pottery, hiking, book club, because they took time away from supporting his career. My therapist, whom I started seeing in week 2, called it codependency, disguised as love. "You derived your worth from his success," she explained during one session. "His dreams became your dreams. His happiness became your responsibility." "But isn't that what love is?" I asked. "Putting someone else first. Love is mutual support," she corrected. "What you're describing is self-erasure." The truth of it stung. I've been so busy being James's girlfriend, James's manager, James's support system, that I'd forgotten how to be Sarah. The social media torture. Against all wisdom and Mia's explicit instructions, I couldn't stop checking Luna's social media. It was masochistic, but I needed to see the life he'd chosen over ours. Their happiness was documented in artful snapshots, late-night songwriting sessions, farmers' market dates, candid laughs over coffee. She tagged him in everything, and he, who had barely acknowledged my existence online in 7 years, reposted everyone. The worst was a video of them performing together at the venue, where we'd celebrated our 5th anniversary. They sang a duet, something haunting and beautiful about finding your true north. The comments universally agreed they were couple goals and meant to be. I threw my phone across the room. It survived, unfortunately. What the pictures didn't show, what I had to remind myself, was the wreckage left behind. They didn't capture me crying in the shower every morning. They didn't show the awkward division of our possessions, how he'd taken things that were meaningless to him, but held memories for me. They didn't reveal that he'd stuck me with bills he'd promised to split, or that he'd told mutual friends I'd been emotionally manipulative by supporting his career so thoroughly. The best revenge is living well, Mia kept telling me, but I didn't want to live well. I wanted to live in bed, nursing my wounds and composing mental speeches I'd never deliver. Finding myself in the ruins. Rock bottom has a strange gift. There's nowhere to go but up. After a month of wallowing, I woke up one morning and didn't immediately wish I hadn't. It was a small victory, but I clung to it. I started with baby steps: shower every day, eat vegetables occasionally, answer work emails. My colleagues had been patient, but projects were piling up. I threw myself into work with the same intensity I'd once reserved for James's career. The difference was immediate architecture gave back what I put in. My designs improved, my presentations sharpened, and that promotion materialized. "You're like a different person," my boss commented. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." What I was doing was remembering who I'd been before James and discovering who I could be after him. I signed up for a pottery class. On Tuesday nights, his former gig night. My hands, which had forgotten the feel of clay, slowly remembered. I created lopsided bowls and crooked vases, but they were mine. I joined a hiking group and rediscovered the peace of mountain trails and summit views. I read books that had nothing to do with the music industry. Slowly, I began to reclaim space in my own life. Sarjar, the unexpected encounter. 3 months after the breakup, I ran into them at a grocery store. Of all the places for a dramatic encounter, it had to be between the organic produce and the dairy section. I saw him first his familiar form examining avocados with unnecessary intensity. Then she appeared purple hair now faded to lavender, carrying a basket filled with the kind of health food he used to mock. They were discussing dinner plans, domestic and comfortable, in a way that made my chest tight. I could have ducked down another aisle, avoided the awkwardness altogether. Old Sarah would have. But I was trying not to be her anymore. James, I said, my voice steadier than my hands. He turned and his face cycled through surprise guilt and something that might have been regret. Sarah, hi. Luna's eyes widened in recognition. Up close, she was younger than I'd realized, with the kind of effortless beauty that didn't need good lighting or Instagram filters. Ah, she said softly, it's good to see you. Was it I doubted that, but I appreciated the effort. How are you? James asked, and the question felt weighted with more than casual concern. I'm good, I said, and meant it. Really good, actually. Got promoted, leading the new sustainable housing project downtown. That's amazing, he said and sounded genuine. You always wanted that. Yeah, well, sometimes things work out. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Luna fidgeted with the basket handle, and I noticed the guitar calluses on her fingers, the same ones James had. They matched in ways we never had. We should go, James said finally. But Sarah, I'm glad you're doing well. You deserve good things. They left me standing there, holding a bag of apples I didn't remember picking up. I waited until they were gone before allowing myself to cry, not from heartbreak this time, but from the strange relief of surviving the unsurvivable. Brar learning to forgive. Forgiveness, my therapist explained, wasn't about absolving James or pretending the betrayal didn't happen. It was about releasing the hold his actions had on my life. Holding on to angers like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. She said, which sounded like a cliche, but felt true. So I worked on forgiveness, not all at once, but in pieces. I forgave him for falling out of love with me. Hearts change, and we can't control that. I forgave him for falling in love with someone else. Luna wasn't the villain in this story, just another person looking for connection. I struggled more with forgiving the way he'd handled it, the lies, the emotional affair, the way he'd painted me as the problem to justify his choices. But the hardest person to forgive was myself. I had to forgive myself for ignoring the red flags, forgiving too much for losing myself in someone else's dreams. I had to forgive the girl who thought love meant sacrifice, who believed supporting someone else's passion was more important than nurturing her own. You loved with your whole heart, Mia reminded me during one of our wine nights. That's not something to be ashamed of. But I loved stupidly, I countered. No, you loved bravely. The fact that he couldn't appreciate that is his loss, not your failure. Darson rebuilding. 6 months after the pancake morning, I stood in an empty apartment, not the one James and I had shared, but a new place closer to work with large windows and hardwood floors that caught the light just right. It was smaller but entirely mine chosen, without considering anyone else's needs or preferences. I'd left most of our shared furniture behind, selling it or donating it, rather than carrying those memories forward. Here I started fresh a couch in the exact shade of blue he would have hated a dining table for one that expanded when friends visited plants that required the kind of regular care I'd once reserved for his career. The walls remained bare for weeks, until I found the courage to hang my own dreams on them. Architectural drawings I was proud of, photos from the hiking trip where I'd conquered my fear of heights, the lopsided pottery bowl that had become my favorite coffee mug holder. Work flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant drain of managing someone else's life alongside my own, I had energy for innovation, for the kind of bold design choices that got noticed. The sustainable housing project broke ground, and I stood at the construction site, watching my plans become reality. Something concrete and lasting, unlike the castles I'd built in air with James. Dating again. You should try dating, Mia suggested 8 months post-breakup, scrolling through apps on her phone. Look, this guy's cute, and he has a real job. The bar's so low, it's underground. I laughed, but I looked anyway. Dating after a long relationship was like trying to speak a language I'd once known but forgotten. The rules had changed, or maybe I had. I went on a few app dates, coffee meetings that felt like job interviews, dinners where we had nothing in common but loneliness. Then I met David at a conference on sustainable urban planning. He was presenting on green infrastructure, passionate but not in the all consuming way James had been about music. He asked thoughtful questions about my work and remembered my answers. When he suggested dinner, it felt natural rather than obligatory. I should warn you, I said over pasta at a restaurant I'd chosen, I'm pretty fresh out of a long relationship. I'm not sure I'm ready for anything serious. But that's okay, he said easily. I'm just enjoying talking to someone who gets excited about permeable pavement options. I laughed, really laughed for the first time in months. We talked about work, yes, but also about travel books and the hiking trails he'd been wanting to explore. He had his own life, his own dreams, and wasn't looking for someone to complete him or manage his existence. When he kissed me goodnight, it was gentle and undemanding. It didn't set off fireworks or promise forever. It was just nice, and nice felt revolutionary. The year after. A full year after James left, I received a text from an unknown number. Hi, Sarah, it's Luna. I know this is weird, but could we talk? My first instinct was to delete it, block the number, pretend it never arrived. But curiosity won. We met at a neutral coffee shop, not the one where James and I had met, thankfully. She looked tired older somehow, despite the passage of only 12 months. The purple had grown out of her hair, leaving it a natural brown that made her look softer, less like the manic pixie dream girl who'd stolen my boyfriend. I wanted to apologize, she said without preamble. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know I'm sorry for how everything happened. You don't owe me an apology, I said, meaning it. James made his choices. Maybe, but I made mine too. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was cold. I knew about you, how much you'd done for him. I told myself it was different with us, that what we had was real in a way. God, I sound like such an asshole. You sound like someone in love, I corrected. I know how that feels. She smiled sadly. Did you know he's already writing songs about missing what you two had? About taking stability for granted, about losing himself in the pursuit of passion? I hadn't known that, and the information sat strangely in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but a recognition of patterns. He'll probably write songs about you next, I offered. About the one who understood his art but couldn't anchor his life. We broke up, she said quietly. 2 weeks ago. He met someone at a recording studio. A sound engineer who gets his vision in a whole new way. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. I'm sorry, I said, and found I meant it. Are you really? I considered the question. Yeah, it sucks to give your heart to someone who doesn't know how to hold it. We parted with an awkward hug, two women bonded by loving the same inconsistent man. I watched her walk away and felt the last chains of my old life fall away. Tucker, finding my own song. The thing about giving someone everything is that when they leave, you think you'll have nothing left. But that's not true. What remains is you bruised, maybe rearranged, certainly, but still whole. I learned to cook meals for one without feeling lonely. I learned to sleep in the middle of the bed, to make decisions without consultation, to plan a future that bent to no one's dreams but my own. I traveled to Seattle for a conference and didn't think about the job I'd turned down until the plane ride home. I submitted my designs for an international sustainability competition and won second place. David and I continued dating slowly and carefully. He had his own apartment, his own friends, his own Sunday morning ritual of cycling that he wasn't willing to give up. I had my pottery classes, my hiking group, my Thursday night wine sessions with Mia. We fit into each other's lives without consuming them. I love how independent you are, he told me one night, after I'd declined to skip my pottery class for a concert he wanted to attend. It's refreshing. I wasn't always, I admitted. I used to think love meant giving up pieces of yourself. What do you think it means now? I thought about it, my hands still dusty with clay. I think it means choosing to share your life with someone, not giving it away. The final goodbye. 2 years after the pancake morning, I was packing up to move in with David, not because either of us needed to, but because we wanted to build something together. In the back of my closet, I found a box I'd forgotten about, concert tickets photos, a USB drive of James's early recordings. I sat on my bedroom floor surrounded by the debris of my past life. There was the photo from our 3rd anniversary, both of us grinning at the camera, unaware that happiness could be so fragile. There was the ticket stub from his first paid gig, where he'd pulled me on stage and sung directly to me, making me feel like the only person in a crowded room. For the first time, I could look at these memories without pain. They were part of my story, but they no longer defined it. I kept one photo, not of us as a couple, but of me at one of his shows, caught mid-laugh at something someone off camera had said. I looked happy, But more than that, I looked young in a way that had nothing to do with age. I'd believed then that love could conquer all that giving, everything guaranteed receiving everything in return. The rest I threw away, not out of anger or spite, but because I no longer needed physical reminders of a lesson well learned. That night, David found me on the balcony of what would soon be our shared apartment, watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Just thinking about how far I've come," I said, leaning into his warmth. "Yeah, where did you start?" I thought about James, about pancakes burning on a griddle, about 7 years dissolved in 5 words. I thought about Luna with her purple hair and guitar calluses, about patterns repeated until they're broken, about the different ways we lose and find ourselves in love. "Somewhere else," I said finally, "but I like where I ended up." He kissed the top of my head and we stood there together, separate, but joined, watching the city pulse with life and possibility. Inside, boxes waited to be unpacked. Two lives ready to be blended without losing their distinct flavors. I had given James everything, it was true. But in return, though, not in the way I'd expected, I'd received something invaluable myself. The pancakes I make now are for me first, sometimes shared with David, sometimes enjoyed alone with a book and morning coffee. They never burn because I've learned to pay attention to be present in my own life, rather than constantly tending to someone else's. And when I flip them at just the right moment, golden and perfect, I think about how the best recipes, like the best relationships, are the ones where nothing is sacrificed, where every ingredient maintains its integrity while contributing to something larger than itself. I gave him everything, yes, but I saved the best parts for myself. Nurse epilogue 5 years later. I'm at a coffee shop, not the same one. This city has too many to return to old haunts when I hear it. A guitar melody, familiar yet strange drift.